Hello, my name is Fred Pennic, founder of HITConsultant, providing insightful coverage of healthcare innovation. And this is Founder Stories, where founders tell their story of what led them to start their businesses so aspiring healthcare entrepreneurs can learn valuable lessons on building successful healthcare startups. So what happens when you recognize a key pain point in physician-to-physician communication after watching your mother suffering from Parkinson's disease go in and out of the hospital, seeing between 10 to 15 doctors within the course of a month? Well, Jonathan Govette decided to do something about it by developing a web-based cloud application that exchanges referrals quickly and efficiently and can complement any medical record software. Jonathan is the founder and CEO of ReferralMD, a collaborative healthcare startup focused on getting rid of paper-based communication once and for all. In this interview, Jonathan will share his founder story of how he started ReferralMD and some of the lessons he's learned along the way in his journey.
You can just start off by giving me a little background overview of yourself.
Definitely. My name is Jonathan Govette, the CEO of ReferralMD. Kind of came to this solution of the problem a few years ago. It's kind of accumulation of my life story, unfortunately. Good and bad, both, and I'll kind of share both sides of that. Ever since I was a young boy, my mother was in and out of the hospital. I've actually remembered having multiple birthdays growing up in the hospital with her. She has Parkinson's, in addition to a couple other smaller problems. And unfortunately, growing up and seeing the issues of her having to go back and forth to 10 or 15 doctors in the course of a month, you start seeing there's some issues with communication. And unfortunately, when I was a little kid, I didn't understand that. Growing up, starting my own software company, I started to realize that the problem still persisted. And growing up till about 4 or 5 years ago, I decided to actually do something about that. I started working alongside a few hundred doctors that I know personally here in the Fresno, California market. And we actually have a running group. It's kind of funny that we call it the Run Runners. We get together every Tuesday and run 2 to 5 miles. And the core of the group is all nurses and doctors from 3 different hospitals here. And I kind of shot my idea out to them in 2008, 2009, and found that there was a huge issue with communication, not just with primary practices, but also all specialties and the hospitals themselves. And I decided to do something about it. Originally, I started a referral management tool for non-medical practitioners, so just normal business owners. But I found that segment was not used to sending referrals or weren't forced to send referrals like the healthcare industry was. So I decided to pivot and reform a new company called ReferralMD, and that's kind of how it all started. But it really stemmed from just understanding the major problems of healthcare and the current EMR systems that are numerous. I think there's over 1,400 EMRs and several thousand practice management solutions that are out there. The one main issue with every one of them is they're unable to collaborate or communicate with other EMRs. So our goal at ReferralMD is to build a non-standardized system that anybody can use. So it's an open system that no matter what platform you're using currently, you can utilize us and collaborate with other providers seamlessly and very affordably.
Now, what's your educational background by trade? Do you have healthcare experience, or is this just something strictly based off of your life experience that prompted you to go forward with starting that company?
With our previous company, I built software for primary care practitioners and other smaller practices. So having those relationships already built in place allowed me to build a pilot a lot faster than it would be to just go off the street and randomly start a company. So that helped a lot. My background is actually in software development. I went to school a long time ago for aerospace engineering and finance.
Okay.
So I'm always a tech. I've always been a tech at heart, both on the software side and also on the hardware side as well. So my main clients were actually hospitals and clinics at that time before, when we actually sold software and servers and core routers, etc. So being involved with that market for the last 10 years got me more ingrained with their issues and challenges, not just on the hardware side, but also the day-to-day workflow and operations side of the hospital as well. Understanding how patients come in, how they leave, what type of communications problems they've had. And that experience taught me firsthand that ReferralMD was a very important aspect of what they would be needing in the future. Now, it took me a few years, obviously, to build it because the application is rather extensive, but now we're closer to running our own pilot test now with several hundred providers throughout the country and also globally. So that's where we're in the process of hiring more people now. It's tough, but we're making great strides every day.
Now tell me about your team. How many people do you currently have? Who's your co-founder, and what's their background?
Definitely. We just brought on board 2 new staff actually within the last 2 weeks, so we're up to 9 now. Our co-founder, we actually have a few, Simon Jung and Tony Nguyen are our 2 lead developers and co-founders. They have a background in security they build software for the Pentagon, Navy, the Air Force, and they also build software for Govette International, LA Healthcare Plan, and a few other facilities here in California and back east as well. So we have a medical team that's built software for HIPAA compliant data storage, etc. And our 2 new recent ads are a little bit younger. They're more junior developers, but they have extensive experience in healthcare as well. My goal is to acclimate them to the core software that we have now and get them up and running and provide a beta testing site within the next few months for our clients that have already signed up to use it. So we're slowly growing, but we're definitely looking for more qualified staff as we expand or scale our company.
Now, what are some of the challenges around scaling and really just kind of getting off the ground?
That's a good question. There's a couple of different points that make it extremely hard for most startups to get going. Number one, it's the actual people that you bring on board, the staff that you have, and whether or not they feel motivated to work, consistently. When you're, as you know, running your own company, it's very tough to motivate people. Money is usually not the only motivator. It's also
right.
It's the success. It's feeling that you're a part of something bigger than yourself. So when you're solving a problem such as communication that affects not just a individual doctor or not just the staff of the hospital, or not just the executives, not just the risk manager, not just the liaisons or the marketing department. When you're affecting the entire organization level, in addition to affecting the patient, you're touching potentially every single person in the world that has access to healthcare. And so it's a lot bigger problem than just sending a referral. It goes a lot deeper than that. Both the authorizations that get handled through the insurance companies, the progress updates, they all tie into what we're looking to accomplish. That's the most valuable for me. What I've learned over the last few years is how to hire appropriately, finding people that have that passion. And I'm leaning towards now anybody that I bring on board I want to make sure that they have experience in a startup previously. And it didn't have to be successful, although that would be wonderful if it was. It's showing that somebody has the aptitude and skills and also the persistence to try something new. Unfortunately, most people that work at the 9-to-5 corporate world that have never run a startup before or started one themselves don't understand how hard it is. And most people give up if they tried. So I've leaned towards hiring people that only have startup experience in the past. And that's helped me a lot. With this new startup versus the ones I've had before. That's key for me now. This is my 3rd startup, 4th company. So I've learned my first 2, I had relatively no clue all the major issues. And now after being through it, the ringer a few times, then you learn from all the mistakes that you've made. I think the most valuable, though, is actually the networking connections. I know most people do not spend their time networking with other entrepreneurs or other providers or other customers in their space. They feel that they know all the answers, so they try to do it all by themselves. And that's probably the biggest mistake most entrepreneurs make is you need to be out there, even if you're a developer. And this is unfortunately, most developers are introverts where they stay inside and they program with the lights off all night long. Mm-hmm. The issue arises, though, and what I've found is they don't understand the core business. They understand their little piece of the pie, but they don't understand how it all fits together, the vision of the company. And I make it mandatory. You have to attend at least one event a week, going out there, talking to other startup founders, other VCs, venture capital companies, angels, just so you understand that the team has to all work together to make it happen. It's not just a one-man show. And I found that people that do that and enjoy doing that have more success in their job, even if they are just a programmer or just a business developer, or if they're finance, or if they're the CEO, for example. I think everybody has to participate in all levels of the company to truly make it successful. Those two are probably the most important that I've learned over the years. Networking is huge. I probably attend 2 or 3 events a week. Some are programmer specific, and some are just business development, and some are finance. And it teaches you that you're not the smartest person in the bucket. There's a lot of people out there are smart, and the goal is to just be friends with everybody that you can, so that if you have a problem, you have somewhere to go to and talk about it and get the answers that you need quickly. And that's really the biggest benefit I've found over the last couple of years, is just building up a huge, massive network of people that are smarter than you. It sounds easy, but it takes time, unfortunately.
It's definitely something that you put the time in, and you're not going to immediately get the return on investment on your time on that. It's just something that's going to take a long time. I kind of look at it as planting seeds and then watching it grow.
Right. You're 100% right. I mean, I think that's kind of how we met as well. We just started helping each other, giving each other feedback on each other's websites and strategies. And over time, if you plant enough of those seeds, now not all of them are going to come to fruition and build out great relationships. But if you do, let's say just as a number, 10 a month, and 3 of them come through in spades, offer more help than you've actually provided back to them. So
right.
That's where great friendships and relationships come from, and great networking opportunities. Prime example, I met Michael Chong at VLab probably about 6 months ago. And within that time frame, he started his own company as well. So he has a startup. And him and I chat almost every week now about different issues that we're having. And it just takes off from there. And now he's helping provide talent research, because he has a scouting agency. Basically, goes out, he has engineers that he finds jobs for, pretty much like a recruiter. And he's helping us for free, and vice versa. We give him marketing advice for free. And it's a good win-win for both parties. But those 2 aspects, I think, as an entrepreneur, if you do it right away, and you don't, even before you have a product out, you should have a network of at least 10 or 20 people that you can trust and talk to, and make sure that you hone your skills with them on at least a weekly basis, via email, calling, or in person, preferably in person if you can, and that way you can build that relationship stronger. So
how many clients does ReferralMD have right now, and at what stage are you at? Are you in beta? Are you just getting ready to launch? What stage are you in right now?
We spent the last few months, we started officially programming in April timeframe, so about 7 months ago. Actually about 8 now. 8 months ago we started building the prototype, and we finalized the prototype, and now we are entering our pilot phase. We've received over, I think, almost 500 inquiries to date from major institutions around the world, not just the United States. But our focus will always be the United States first, because it's an easier market to conquer. Once you do the United States, and other countries will follow very quickly. So from those inquiries, we spend our time getting them through the process of signing documentation that they will participate in the beta. And then from beta, once they are secure with that, then they signed a letter of intent to purchase our software afterwards. So our goal now, between now and the next 2 months, is to process as many of those 500 as possible through our sign-up process, which is basically a 3-prong approach, where we introduce ourselves, we show them the software, and then the 3rd prong is going to have them actually use the software as part of their core workflow on a day-to-day basis. So we're making sure we choose the right connections, not only by name, like John Hopkins, for example, that recently signed up, MD Anderson, Sloan Kettering, some of the names that you might recognize, and in addition to other institutions, not just the United States, but Canada and the UK, etc. Our goal, though, is our initial pilot testers, we want to make sure that they participate not just on a monthly basis, but on a weekly basis, meaning we call them, they can get feedback, and make sure that the application is properly built to their specifications. With that, it is tough, because we only have 2 people doing that, myself and Quitman Smith. So to call 500 people and build relationships with each one of those, it's a very time-consuming piece of our day, in addition to building the software itself. So trying to manage that is very tough. But hence the reason why we're actually going out for capital now, so that we can hire on additional teammates that can handle that type of job and do it better than what I could do personally.
Now, how did you go out there and get these partnerships with these hospitals? I mean, these are some very well-known brands within the healthcare community. How did you go about getting that?
The great thing is, and I found that, and as you as a owner of your own website, HITConsultant, by creating valuable content and becoming an authority on your market space, that over time users will find you online via different search mediums, such as either social media like LinkedIn or Facebook, or they'll find you organically through searches on Google based on whatever search criteria they put in. Using those, understanding that people are looking for tools like us, we spent the last year or so building out a blog or article site that allows doctors to learn more about how to market their company more effectively. Most of our articles that we write are on the marketing front, so teaching customers or teaching our clients on how to generate more patient flow, increase revenues, how to lower their costs or their liabilities. And we give them specific examples on how to do that. 95% of our blog is on guides on how to do something better within your organization. And not just for a small practice, for example, but all the way up to a hospital level. And so the CTO or the CEO of the company can read our blog and learn something from it and actually use it instantly, meaning actually take the points, let's say 1 through 9, and if they start processing that information, they can actually see a return on their investment almost immediately. And that's where the value comes in. Our goal is to write great content on a weekly basis, market it and promote it. And then over time, people will come back to your article site and read more and more. And then your goal at the end of the day, obviously, is to sell your service. So as long as people understand that, hey, this person is providing an amazing resource here, and they also have a product that looks compelling, over time they'll actually sign up and purchase your product as well. And that's actually how we found the 500 plus organizations that have come on board. We've not had to cold call anybody. That's 100% organic. And the benefit on our side with our product is once we seed the initial city, and I'll give you an example, Miami EDU, they've called us and they want to purchase our product not only for their hospital in Miami, but also over 250 accounts of all the ambulatory doctors that send referrals back to the hospital. So one person can actually generate 200 to 500 sales for us. And so our goal is to market our product to at least one major institution per city. And then from there, each of those hospitals will have anywhere from 1,500 to 2,000 other relationships that are already in place, meaning they're already sending referrals, authorizations, et cetera, back and forth, but now they can replace that fax with our technology instead and become more efficient and save money that way. So our sales process is actually fairly easy. We're very fortunate that we don't have to hire a very large team or sales force to do the knocking on doors. We just have to, write great content, partner with great providers such as yourself and others, and work together in forming a blog syndicate. And what that is basically a partnership of blog owners. And blog is really not the right word for it. Blog is, most people think blogs are short, it's fluff articles. Ours are thoroughly thought out research on different topics, and you do a great job on your site on the IT side, and we focus more on the marketing. We love IT as well. We provide some content of yours and vice versa. I think those are the two top markets most people read about, are IT and also marketing. How to make money and how to install better devices in your organization so you can save money and become more efficient. Those two go hand in hand in operations, or for the operations of a hospital or for a small practice. That's probably my secret for success, is utilizing what we have now with social media and also with Google itself, and really leveraging our knowledge that we have a lot of. And the goal is how do you write that consistently? And that's one of my main struggles now, is as one of the sole writers for ReferralMD. It's tough, in addition to managing the day-to-day, the programming, the website, etc. And that's another reason why we're looking for more capital as well, just because it is tough to build it all out with as a sole person. Now, the programmers do most of the work on that side, but on the marketing side, I'm looking to bring on more people that understand how to promote yourself on a global scale, and that's very tough to find nowadays.
Right. So let's talk about funding. You mentioned it a few times. How much has ReferralMD raised up to date, and what are you looking to raise now? Are you raising a Series A? Where are you in your funding process?
We've raised from 2 investors so far, and I can't disclose the amount yet, but we've raised 2. We are in the process of speaking with several other institutions, both on the venture capital side or firms, as well as individual angels and angel groups. The goal right now is we're not going to seek into Series A until next year, which is coming up pretty quickly, but not towards the end of the year. We're actually going out for a small, it's called a bridge loan or convertible debt. It allows us to forego the evaluation period prior to the initial A round, which allows the market to decide what your company's worth versus yourself. And you never, as this is a little advice for any startups that are listening to this, obviously everybody wants to set a price to your company, but if you're pre-revenue like we are, that's impossible to do, and there's no point in guessing because you're probably going to be wrong anyway. So the goal is to find out what you need as far as a monetary amount that will get you to your MVP, which is your minimal viable product, and show that customers like it and they're using it. Once you can prove that model, then obviously your next step is to scale and to start adding more users. And that's where the seed A or Series A comes in. And that's where you ask for, and most startups usually run between $3 to $10 million for their A round, just at least in the healthcare space. Healthcare is a little more expensive than most standard startups that are more mobile-based, just because with HIPAA and some of the other security concerns, you have to have a lot stricter system in place to manage the data. So the servers are more expensive, and it's just a lot harder to find the talent that can do it. So you have to pay people a little bit higher wages than you normally would otherwise. But yeah, definitely we're looking towards, I would say, about 3 to 5 interviews a week with different groups. We're looking to pick the right one right now. So we're actually speaking pretty much every week with at least 5 to 10 people. So it's a little overwhelming on that side as well. But I think in the beginning, I would be cautious for any entrepreneurs that are listening as well, not to divulge too much information, because unfortunately most angel groups and also VCs are just filling their pipeline with companies, and they're not probably 100% interested in exactly what you're doing yet. So until you're actually out. So the goal is just to keep them on your radar, let them know what's going on every few months, but don't divulge your whole entire plan to them because they may share it with somebody else that you might not want them to. I know when we first started, I was excited to get calls every day, and now it's just another day-to-day activity I have to deal with. And it's better just to focus on your development and do that first and not worry about the money because it'll come guaranteed once you have a product out.
Now, how hard is that from that perspective? At first you're excited that, people may be able to give you money. What are the challenges in presenting to get funding?
There's a lot of them. I think if you have a product, obviously, that is very scalable, meaning that there's already a certain amount of interest already out in the market before you're out, that obviously helps. But most startups actually do it in reverse. They'll build a product without having the people ready to buy it. And that's the biggest, most challenging problem most people have is having, let's say 500 to 1,000 or more individual organizations ready to purchase it. Now, it's a little different with consumer applications or mobile apps where the defining number is usually 10 million people or higher before you're successful. In a B2B application, especially for healthcare, you can have a home run with one client or 2 clients, as we talked about before, like Johns Hopkins or MD Anderson. If you secure a deal like that, you're done. I mean, you can go out and raise $5 million very easily, just because if a major institution purchases your product like that, they know that model is very scalable to the next hospital, and it's very easy to understand what your revenue model is and how much money you'll be making per month. And then the VCs can do the math. They can figure out if you scale to 500, multiply the revenue times 500, and that's your number. And then they know what the return on investment is very quickly. So the day-to-day, I ignore the I get a lot of emails pretty much daily from everybody, and unfortunately, they just want to know more where you're at. So I'm very honest nowadays. I just tell them straight up, this is exactly what we need. This is what we're not going to do equity yet. We're going to do convertible debt. If you're interested, we can talk further. And I would say 75% of the VC groups don't want to fund less than $5 million anyway. It's just not worth their time to do that. So that's where we're focusing more on the angel side, people that are in smaller groups. And in Palo Alto, pretty much every city has their own little angel network. And the goal is, as an entrepreneur, to identify those and attend events. I do a lot of networking events with other users, other entrepreneurs, and have them introduce you to their angels that funded their companies. And that's probably the best way through those introductions. You're not going to get a walk-in most cases. No VC is going to just knock on your door and say, hey, come visit me. It's usually through some type of introduction that you'll get to land the meeting that you want. But that's kind of where we're at right now.
Now, besides looking out for VCs and angels, how do you approach developing your advisory board?
That's a tough one. We're actually going through that right now. And I'll give you my experience, my limited experience on that. This is the first time I've ever had an official advisor. I always have 10 or 15 or 20 pseudo advisors, people that I know personally that want to help out, but they're not getting any type of return, meaning they're not receiving equity.
Right.
We brought on board, his name is Chris Gillen, just recently, about 2 months ago. And we gave him basically a time frame. We said, we need this, X, Y, Z by this date. If you produce, we'll keep you on for 2 years. If you don't, we have to let you go. And it's similar to a probationary period as an employee. We did the same thing with our advisor. And I think that's a safe way for most entrepreneurs to operate, where they provide a 2-year contract with an X percentage. And I'll just throw out different percentages. Usually most most advisors receive anywhere from 0.25, if they're really good, up to 0.5% of the company. If they're more of a junior level where they have a couple connections but not a lot, you could potentially offer 0.05 to 0.15%. But the issue is most of these advisors will come on board and want all of your company right away, meaning a full 100% of that stock that you're offering instantly without even giving an opportunity to test them. That's a red flag. Walk away from that. Recommendation is, like I said, provide a 2-year contract with a 3-month cliff. And what that allows you to do as a co-founder or the CEO of the company is to evaluate their success within that 3-month period. And if they do a great job for you, and honestly, you only care about 2 things. You care about having them provide funding opportunities to you or providing introductions for money. So it's money or money, either through an introduction or through actual customers. If they can't do those 2 things as an advisor, they shouldn't be there. That's your job as an advisor, is to do that for your company that you work with. Down the road, as a board of advisors, that's more on the operations side, and that's a whole separate. That's usually once you're already out and once you get going, you're making money. Those are more about how to hire better, how to run your business better, and key strategic partnerships, etc. But in the beginning, give up very little and really work them out. Make sure they understand what they need to do. If they can't, let them go quickly. Don't waste your time with people. Unfortunately, most people have their best interests and not the companies at hand.
How do you stay focused? That's one of the hardest things to do anything is, you really have to be lasered in. How do you maintain focus and not lose sidetrack of everything when you're managing so many different pieces of the company at the moment? How do you stay focused? And how do you prioritize which activities you should work on more than others?
Definitely. As a startup, the CEO, you're pretty much wearing 20 hats. And the goal is you do not need to be an expert on all of them, but you have to understand which ones are, like you just mentioned, which ones are more valuable at that moment, what needs to be done quickly. Obviously, in the beginning, money talks. The more money you have in your bank account, it's easier to travel, easier to meet with different people, easier to attend events, easier to hire. So that's usually the priority, obviously, number 1. Number 2, though, very close number 2 is obviously getting the product done. And in order to do that, you have to have the same concept. You have to have the staff, and you have to make sure people are on board, motivated. And that's just those 2 aspects. Obviously, there's the marketing component, there's the operations component. which are obviously in itself another full-time job. So as a CEO, you're actually running, 20 full-time jobs within a 24-hour period. So there's no way to get all that done every single day. So you have to segment it out to what's the fire, what's burning my butt every single day, to put it nicely. And then from there, put that out and then move on to the next problem. I usually focus on, I would say the last 6 months, I spent a lot of time building up the amount of users that would come onto our pilot. That was my main focus. And now that I've accomplished that, I'm going now full-time more into the development side. So I'm spending more time with my programmers on a day-to-day than I was before. And as I bring on more talent, we just brought on Seth and Owen just recently. They need a lot more of my time because obviously they're getting acclimated to the project, the software itself, the code, and I spend a lot of time getting them set up. They're relatively new, within 2 weeks, so I have to handhold them a little bit, but they're slowly picking up the slack and now doing more of the work by themselves without having to call me. But that's always on the front of my mind to make sure that process is getting done quickly. But funding, that's just about making sure I set aside every single day, at least 2 or 3 hours a day, to help people. So I actually go out and I help other startups, other entrepreneurs, other angels, anybody I know that might need my help. I go out and help them first. And as I mentioned previously, out of those 10 I help a day, even if only 1 or 2 or 3 back help me out in the future, it always comes back to you in spades. And
right.
I'm a strong believer of always giving first. Don't ask questions. You don't have to formalize it with a contract. Just help people. And later on, if it looks like it's going to be something bigger, then you can talk about compensation or working together more strategically later. But just help people. Honestly, that's been my success. Probably the number one success I've ever had is from that. Is through just relationship building. Second, I would say my other part of my day is the operation side, just managing the financials, managing the corporation documents that I always go back and forth with the lawyers about, payroll. That's always a fun activity. Going out and making sure that's properly set up every week, and obviously HR issues and things like that we have to go through. But those are all minor. It's really about the company, the software itself, and then funding. Those are the 2 top priorities I have, and everybody else understands that. So if equipment comes to me and asks me for something else, I usually tell them, hey, I can't do that today. I'll do it on Friday. And I always let my team know when I can get something done by. But they understand that we have a lot on our plate right now.
Now, what are some of the setbacks that you have had, and how did you overcome them?
And I would say one of the hardest things over the last year or so was it's definitely working with the people that you bring on board. The people that you bring on as co-founders or employees. It's definitely a learning experience, and that's where I've tightened my ropes a little bit to understand what type of people I need to hire. In the past, it's usually you find somebody talented that has the time to help you, to work for equity only, for example, but they have, 3 kids, just got married, they have a sick grandma and, all these other smaller problems that may come up later, but you take them on because they're interested, but they don't have the motivation or they have never done a startup before. And so it's their first time. And I found that first-timers have a major problem acclimating to the day-to-day of a startup. It takes them, 2 or 3 times longer to get going. And unfortunately, I've had this happen a lot. Excuses start coming up why I can't get something done in time. And I realized very early on, and it's kind of cutthroat, but you have to be that way as the owner, is to, hire slowly and fire quickly. If somebody just, for whatever reason, is not working out, and it could be they might be a great person, but for whatever reason, their fit within the company or their culture is a little bit different. And even if they're your best friend that he quit his job for you, you have to let him go, because the problem is it's gonna keep on exacerbating the problem. It's going to affect other people in the company, especially the new people that you bring on board. Issues will compound and it'll just become a major hassle later on. And so you really have to separate your friendships from the business itself, and it's tough sometimes. But I've learned, that's the one thing I've learned the most of. I actually had, I think, 17 interns at one time, and I kept one of them out of all 17.
Wow.
And it was tough. I mean, some of these people worked 2-3 months for me, or 4 months in some cases. And And unfortunately, they just didn't have the aptitude that I needed to really make it. And I was fortunate enough to, I let them go very nicely. I let them say, unfortunately, it's not working out. But that was my biggest problem, is just those dealing with rejection, or giving out rejection to people. Most people are not inherently like that. Most people always want to satisfy people, help people out. As a CEO, you have to learn to say no and then reject people a lot. And I'm not like that. I was never like that before, but I had to teach myself to be negative in some cases to help, get the work done. And I think that's the hardest part, is really rejecting people, telling them no, and firing them. Really, it's tough.
Now, for a lot of people who are, they got a startup idea, they're thinking about starting up, but they don't have a co-founder. And what you just talked about brought up something. How do you approach that? What are the pros and cons of doing it all yourself, or looking for a co-founder and trying to bring one on? And a lot of times, a lot of people bring a co-founder they're not necessarily friends with. They don't really have a bond. Mm-hmm. They're just like, hey, this person has these skills, let's go. And then they end up having all these problems down the road. What's your opinion on, the whole co-founder versus having a team?
I would say it depends on obviously how big you plan to scale your company. If it's a small app that you can build on your own because you're an engineer, and you have some kind of marketing prowess, then potentially you can do it by yourself. But anything in healthcare specific, there has never been a case of an individual building an application by themselves and marketing it and growing into a $100 million company. Everybody needs somebody else to challenge their ideas, to say no to them, to rebut what they're talking about. In some cases, to tell them they're doing it wrong. Nobody gets it right 100% of the time, and that's something as a CEO you learn very quickly, is you cannot do it by yourself. No matter how smart you are, no matter if you are single like I am and no kids, and where you can definitely dedicate 20 hours a day if you want to, but you still can't get it done. There's just too much to do. So the goal is with a co-founder, depending on if you're a business development side or if you are on the engineering side or programming side. My example was I was actually a little hybrid. I did the front end design, the coding for the front end. I do the design of the back end. I do the content writing. I do the finance. I do the hiring. I do pretty much everything in the company except for the deep database design, as far as actually coding it. So I taught myself a little bit of everything, but I realized very early on that there's no way I could do that. So I went out and found people. There's actually a couple of good resources, by the way, for people that are looking to bring people on board, because I get this question a lot at group meetings, is how did you find your people? Well, I use two sources. I use LinkedIn and I use angels.co, which is basically a funding website along with a recruiting site. And they're both free. And what I do is you can actually filter out, obviously, what you're looking for. So if I'm looking for a .NET programmer, I can type in .NET and it filters out 10,000 people down to maybe 500. And then from there I can filter even further and find the people in maybe a certain area that I'm hiring in, or another skill set that I want to filter out. And then from there, I just send out a copy and paste email to every single one of them, because obviously they have to be interested as well. Out of those, let's say 100 or so, you might receive 10 emails from people saying, you know what, I actually like what you're doing, let's talk. And then from there, you call them all, you set up meetings, and you sit down with them if possible. And then from there, you have your other teammates interview to see if it's a good match. But I ask the tough questions up front. I tell them straight up, this is going to be hard. Do you have 40 to 50, 60 hours a week to work? And that's my first filter. If they say no, I move on. But if they say yes, I wouldn't mind putting that much time in, then we start talking further about the development stack, what we need. And then from there, if they can satisfy that, if they can actually do the work, then we give them a test. We'll give them a little module to work on for a week. If they do a good job at that, then we bring them on board as a test. And how that works, and most startups know this, is you bring them on as either, you can pay them if you want to, but I wouldn't recommend it for 3 months. I would give them a 1-year cliff where you provide X amount of equity, and it's vested over 4 years. And after the end of the year, then they actually accumulate that stock. But before that, if they leave, let's say in 3 months, they don't get anything. And that allows you to be a little more open with your hiring practices and bring people on that would normally maybe not, potentially be there. And what I mean by that is, if you had to pay everybody, like right now we're not paying only a few people, I could test out 5 people when normally I could only afford 1. And then out of that, maybe at the end of the day, I keep 3 or 4, and I lose 1 or 2, which is not a bad thing. You always have to know going into the hiring process that not everybody's going to work out, as long as it doesn't take you a long time to get them up and running and trained. But that's worked very well for me. All the people we have on board started as equity only and then transitioned to payroll once we determined they were going to be worthwhile for the company. And it's probably the best way to handle it. That way you don't lose anything if they don't work out, and you gain something if they do. So it's a win-win for everybody.
So what are your goals for next year? Since we're in December, what are some of your goals for next year for 2013?
I would say top goal right now is I'm bringing on 1 more staff this year. Then I'm going to cap it. I'm going to be done for a little bit, at least another 3 months, I hope. No more hiring. Second would be I'm working alongside a gentleman that works with the FDA right now, and he is interested in investing. So my next month or so is going to be working alongside him and making sure I answer all his concerns and questions. And if he is interested, which I think he is, we've had a lot of good meetings so far, to retain about a $500,000 investment from him. And from there, obviously, build out the team that we already have on board, bring them all on full-time, move them out to California, and finalize our pilot. Now, pilot's the next major step with us. Our MVP is close to being finalized. I want to get our between 20 to 100 hospitals and clinics on board, test out the model for about a month, and then from there, we'll open up to an open beta, which allows other users to come on board through our sign-up process. So invite the rest of the 500 to 1,000 people that we want to bring on board. And then from there, we'll seek our next round, which would be between $5 or $10 million or so, and that will allow us to scale it. Additional servers, additional clientele, staff, support, customer support, etc. And that's really our goal. That's going to be happening all next year. So it's going to be a busy year for us.
How do you address all those concerns? When you're talking to the funding guys, how are you addressing those concerns? Because they're asking all kinds of questions. Like how do you deal with those questions?
We built a very nice, succinct slide deck that actually runs through most of their questions before they even ask them. So it actually helps us and helps them really concentrate on what's important. So at the end of the day, it's the number one concern is, okay, great, you have a great idea, but number one, can you make it? Is it achievable? And 2, when do I get my money back? And as long as you show them a model that satisfies both those questions, then they'll invest in you. And the key is making it obviously as quickly as possible and realistically as possible. Companies that come out and say, I'm going to make you, $500 million in a year are unfortunately not telling the truth. But companies that show a model where you can scale slowly and over time and then grow organically and also in multiple, not just regionally, but nationally and internationally, and achieve that in a way that makes sense to them, then you'll obviously have more success that way. And that's why we're talking to angels now versus VCs. VCs are more on the explosive side. They want to give you $10 or $20 million, and then they want to see $100 million return within 3 years, which is not really achievable for most startups that quickly. So the goal is obviously to start slower, scale it, make sure that everything's working perfectly. So at the end of the day, we want our company, ReferralMD, to be the standard for every single healthcare institution in the world, to use our product to communicate information about their patients to other providers. And that's the basic sense behind it. We want people to basically be able to throw away that fax machine completely and use us. And at the end of the day, it's a fairly easy concept to understand, but very complex to obviously build. And that's our goal as to how we want to sell our application. Show them it's very easy to use. You jump in, you're in and out within minutes. You'll spend your time by the fax machine all day long on the phone, on follow-up calls all the time. But
Right.
that's our goal right now, is to work alongside a toll from the FDA and really build that out with him. And he's a doctor as well, so he understands our problems. And I think that's one of my biggest problems in the past, was I focused on angel groups that weren't healthcare related. So they really didn't understand what we were doing. They knew it was going to be big, but they didn't know how to help us. Our partners that we form now, that we want, and I won't accept anybody but healthcare specific startups, or VCs or angels, is because I want them to not only give us great money, but also smart money. Somebody that's actually going to help us take off and help us market, help us come up with our appropriate models to sell it, strategies, etc. And that's more valuable than the money itself.
So where do you see this space going over the next few years? This is just an exciting time to be in healthcare right now. It's just so much going on, so much innovations, so many startups coming. Where do you see this space going?
Digital health is, I would say we're another 10 years away from, maybe even 15 years away from a fully integrated system, and maybe even 20 years if you count that. Unfortunately, the way we capitalize our market space with programs and software, it's so easy, relatively speaking, to get money for a startup that within the last 4 or 5 years, you've seen a massive rise of EMRs that popped out of nowhere. And you've been following the space for that time frame, so you've seen how many have started. I think there's over 1,400 EMRs today. There's thousands of practice management solutions for a small practice. And unfortunately, as a consumer, it's very tough to decide what to buy. That's one problem. The second problem, obviously, is none of them are integrated. So there's no one protocol that allows anybody to talk to somebody else. And that's another major issue. And that's going to be changing, and it will maybe in 10 or 15 years, but it's not going to happen in any short amount of time. And that's just because the money is being spread out everywhere. There's no one standardization. Will that happen in the future? I really doubt it, just because I don't see like Epic working alongside Allscripts, and I don't see Allscripts working alongside Cerner. These companies have invested far too much money building their products, and that's why they're selling them for. A friend of ours works at community hospital. He's a CTO, and his other partner is a CEO there, and they spent upwards of $75 million to install their Epic system. And the issue arises where they're locked in with that provider for at least 20 years or more, right. And there's nowhere for them to switch. And so if you count the life cycle from when most people have signed up to an EMR, at least for a hospital sense, we're not going to see a change for 20 years, at least. So unfortunately, you'll see a lot of smaller practice, like iPhone, Apple, iPad, some of the really cool technologies, but they're not going to change major problems. They're going to be good for small, individual, maybe like say a dermatologist application or a cardiologist application, but it's not going to directly affect every single person in the world. And it's very tough to do that. Any company that can do that obviously will make a ton of money and do very well. So in these smaller applications that we're talking about, while they're going to be great, they're only going to be localized, meaning only work with certain types of individual practices or individual type of specialties only. I don't see any major applications coming out, and other than ours, unfortunately, which is good for us in a sense, but bad for patients and everything else. I don't see anything widespread happening for a while, just because all the regulations with meaningful use 1, 2, and 3 over the next, so I think 2017, that we're writing the laws, the regulations now. So there's nothing formal yet. Even with HIPAA, everything's wide open. It's very generic. There's not a lot of specific things you have to do when you're building an application to do. They leave it wide open for the company itself to decide. I'll give you an example. For example, timeouts. When you log into a website and the time between you going docile or, when you're not working at the computer anymore to when the software actually logs you out. There's no set in stone protocol that says it has to be 5 minutes or 10 minutes or 20 minutes. It just leaves it up to the designer to decide what's good for their client. Now, that's across the board, it's all open like that. And until somebody comes up with a strategy to standardize healthcare, we're not going to have any type of unified system yet. I would love to one day, and I've thought about this a lot, once we had this company up and running or either sold or IPO'd in the future, to come up with an app store specifically for healthcare where anything that's sold on that platform is automatically integrated with each other. So the designers of we would give out our source code, and they'd have to develop with these protocols in mind.
Mm-hmm.
And then anything on there would automatically work with something else. So as a doctor, I could choose 4 or 5 or 10 applications, and I automatically know they all work together. And the cool part, they'd have competition, so they might have 5 cardiologist apps. But as my practice, I only like this one, and then maybe somebody on the street likes something else. But we could all buy it and still talk to each other. But that's going to be, 15 years down the road or longer. It'd probably take, a couple $100 million investment to build something like that. But that's something I would like to see maybe in 15 years.
Right. And finally, what other advice do you want to give to aspiring entrepreneurs or even entrepreneurs who are already in the space like yourself? Any final words and advice that you would like to give?
I kind of covered most of it. I kind of reiterate going out to these meetings. If you use meetup.com, for example, depending on your area, I know Austin has a lot, Atlanta has a lot, Washington, D.C. has a lot, New York has a lot, where I'm from in San Francisco has a lot. I would literally make it a point to schedule out a block of time, at least 3 of them a week, and really just go out and see what other people are building, how they're doing it. You'll learn more by other people's successes and failures than you doing it yourself. And then obviously you take back what you learned, and you could become a better person that way. I would say that's my tune for success. That's how I made my all the things that have happened to me over the last year or so has come from that. And I've been doing it my whole life, really. Even before that, I've done my own networking group. I've run one with almost 60 partners before, where we got together every other week and talked about our problems. And it was basically a think tank. We all got together. And if you don't have one in your area, I guess my advice would be make one yourself. Go to meetup.com, get a bunch of other CEOs and co-founders together, even if they're different types of companies, and just chat, talk about raising capital. What problems have you had? Who have you talked to? How do you handle hiring people? And just have these meetings on at least once a month minimum, preferably every couple weeks, and just brainstorm with each other. If you do that, you'll be a lot further ahead of other startups in your space or potential competitors that might come up. And that's definitely a huge factor when you talk to other companies that ask you what's your competitive advantage. If you have that network built before somebody else does, then you're going to probably be successful before they are as well. And that's kind of my last major point.